Hello, let's make a Game Boy. So to begin with, we're going to use some image references that I found online. We can load these in as an image plane. And next, add a cube. And we're going to turn on edge length in the overlays. And we're going to scale this to the correct sizes for the reference. First on the x-axis, then the z-axis for the height, and then the y-axis for the depth. You can think of this cube as the bounding box of the complete silhouette of the thing, minus all the bevels on the corners. Turn the edge length display off, and now we can use the reference image and scale it into place behind the model. It's quite lucky with this reference I've found that it's got 3 views that are, I'm assuming that all to scale, so the side view will be exactly the right proportions. So we can cut the reference image, just add a loop cut and then separate the selection and then move that part on the z-axis, just rotate it around 90 degrees and then we can put that in place for the side view. And yeah, that fits perfectly, which is good, which means the measurements and the scale of the drawings is spot on. I'll do the same thing with the final piece for the top view, and then we can place that underneath the object. So if we move that back, I'm assuming we'll just use that back part that sticks out. I think it's just a cover for where the cartridges and the battery pack went on the back of the Game Boy. Okay, with all that done, I'm going to move them to their own reference folder, their own reference collection, and turn off the selectable option, just so I don't accidentally move any of the reference planes. So the 3 edges I've selected there, those are the large bevels. And it's best to work from largest to smallest, so I'm going to add a bevel on these 2 back edges with 8 segments. Now for this edge, if you look here, you can see that we're going to have problems trying to bevel that edge because of the one on the back. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to use a Boolean cutter object. So I'm just going to duplicate the front face and turn it into a box, and then we can just bevel that edge as before. Bevel it to about the right size. And then we can use those faces, invert the selection and delete them. And then we can build a box out of this to cut away from the original box we made. Don't forget to flip the faces because they'll be inverted from the way we constructed it. Scale it on the Y just to make sure it cuts all the way through. And we'll do a difference Boolean. I usually use the brush versions just so that if there's any adjustments or fine tuning that I need to do, I can move it just to get it right. Next I'm going to merge the verts to the profile, and then I'm going to snap the ones at the front so that they're in the same place. And to do that, you press G to grab, and then use Shift Y to exclude the Y-axis, and it will just move it on the X and Z axis. That way you can snap it to be perpendicular with the vertices on the back edge. It's just a little bit of cleanup that just saves us shading issues down the line. Oh, and just as a point of technical what have you, this is the basic silhouette is what we're going for here. All of the hard edges are going to be done by the Bevel Shader, which is the best workflow for hard surface by far. I know a lot of people use sub-D modelling, which does work, but for the most part I think the Bevel Shader technique has the more going for it. It has more pros than cons compared to the sub-D modelling. Okay, just fixing up the topology here. Okay, now before we do the small bevels, we need to factor in this angle change here. So best way to do this is use the knife tool in the front to cut a line for where this angle change occurs. We can then snap the 3D cursor to that line and it will take on the rotational properties of it as well. Duplicate and separate that edge, and then we can construct a box to work as a cutter object. I'm extending these edges by using GG to edge slide, and then if you hold Alt it will slide it further in the opposite direction, so it'll sort of extend it rather than move it along the edge. Just makes it nice and easy. Then we can pivot from that angle and just rotate that so that it aligns with the reference in the side view. And if I cut that section away, that is now in the exact same place. Change these back to global and bounding box. I'm just going to remove that edge for now because it's not helping us. Just merge by distance, get rid of any extra verts that have occurred. Booleans do tend to produce some questionable results sometimes, so you do have to keep double checking your model and fixing up any errors as they come. So for the small bevel, I'm going to select everything apart from that one edge at the back right corner. And then you see it gives a nice uniform bevel all the way around. There, we can merge that vert to last there and just shade it auto smooth for now. Next we're going to construct this part on the back. The bottom half of this, for those of you that had Game Boys, you'll know that the bottom part had batteries, and the top part is where the cartridges slot in. So we're just going to build this box and align it to the reference, and then we're just going to use a bevel on these edges. Whenever you're scaling these boxes into place, don't forget to apply scale before you bevel, otherwise you'll get uneven bevels. Shade auto smooth on that, and then we can Boolean them together. Actually, just going to use the brush version here and just move that slightly. Just so it sits flush with the back. The back faces there. Okay, next we're going to cut out the section for the cartridge. So again, get the width right in the x-axis, just looking at it in top view. And we want it to go just inside the rounded bevel part that we've just added on to the back. So it comes all the way through the top and then sort of slots into that back part. I don't have an exact measurement for how far down it goes, but I do think the cartridges were mostly square shaped, if I remember rightly. Before we Boolean, I'm just going to bevel those front corners. Just to give it a nice look. And while I'm doing this, bear in mind, although I've got reference images in my Blender file, I am also going online every now and then and looking at actual photographs of Game Boys for specific close-up details, especially on the back where it's harder to see. So yeah, you can always look up references. I am going for this specific Game Boy that I searched for is supposedly the original one, so the original measurements. I found out that they don't actually make that screen size on any of the newer ones. It's slightly different. I think it's a 65mm screen on the diagonal, but we'll get to that bit later on. You see you've got 3 small corner bevels and then 1 larger bevel on the bottom right. And you'll notice that this detail where you've got the larger bevel on the bottom right echoes the detail on the bottom right of the Game Boy main case, the main body of the thing. This is one of the design principles that I'll be talking about in a future video that I do. But good design often has sort of repeating elements or echo design elements throughout the model. So I'm just going to cut that in with a slice Boolean. And with the slice Boolean, you'll need to apply it on both parts of the model before it gets rid of the cutter. And you'll see it kind of duplicates that section and it's cut away as a separate object. Next we're going to make these grooves on the back. They look a lot more difficult than they actually are. I've pulled up some photographic reference of these just so I can see them more clearly. So most of the ones I've seen, they look on this reference, they look like they curve downwards, but on most of them they don't look like that. So I'm going to keep the ones that I do straight. I'm just going to use an array to line those all up. You can hold shift while changing the offset just to get more precise movements. And I'm going to use a brush Boolean to remove those. Next I'm going to use a duplicate of the original one, remove the Boolean from it, and then scale it in slightly to fill in this area. So we've basically got a duplicate sitting inside itself. So scale it with Shift Z to exclude the Z axis, and then scale it on the X axis just to make it eat more even all the way around. And then we can remove that from the original cutter that cut the grooves through, and it will bring those areas back. And you'll notice from if you've looked at the photographic references, there's areas on the back that these grooves do not go through. So there's a square part here where the latch for the battery area goes, and then on either side there's sort of a cut through all the grooves where the panel line is going to go. Whenever you're using these cutters, make sure they, especially if you're cutting away from an existing cutter, make sure they are bigger than the previous cutter. So here we can just center this, mirror it over, and then when we remove that, it will bring back those areas. And if we apply it all, we can then get rid of all those cutters, and you can see that was really easy to do. So now we've got that area there where we can put the where we can cut in the panel line for the removable back hatch where the battery pack goes. Just going to X-ray mode so we can position it properly. So that goes along there, and then the bottom part goes pretty much all the way through to the bottom of there. I'm just going to snap that face, right in line with the other part. And we're going to use a slice Boolean on that and just apply it. The thing with these slice Booleans is they don't look like they're going to read that well, but when we add in the bevel shader later on, they will stand out more because it will bevel up to that edge. So that's why we use them. Just need to cut away a section now for this part here. It seems to go, from the references I've seen, it seems to just go very slightly inside that lip. And I'm just going to bevel the top corners. Remember to apply the scale. Don't need much, just a 4-segment bevel and a difference boolean there. And that part there, it's just so that the part below has like a little latch on it that you push down to release the battery cover. Not sure what happened there, something gone wrong with the shading. Something's overlapping. Might need to fix the geometry or something. Just going to add some cuts in with the knife, just to make sure everything's neat and quads. You don't have to fix up all the topology on this is essentially the high poly that we're working on. You generally work high poly to low poly. You don't have to fix up all the topology on the high poly, because a lot of the low poly is just going to gloss over all these details anyway, and it's going to get caught by the bevel shader, so not the actual lines that are across the form of it. Yeah, that seems to have fixed up whatever that shading issue was. So we can then go on and continue to try and make that lip for that part to sit in. This is the only time that these topology issues really matter, is when you're trying to add a cut, and if it's not all quads in all directions, you'll go to add a loop cut and it will just add a single vert on an edge, or it'll only cut through part of the model. The reason I went with making the Game Boy is just such an iconic and classic games console. Everyone knows what it is. It's instantly recognisable. I never had one as a kid, sad to say. I borrowed one for one summer. I don't know how many of my viewers are from the UK, but here in the UK they do this thing at the end of term in primary schools where kids would bring in toys that they weren't that fussed about and then swap them with other kids' toys, and you'd take home ideally something better. I remember I had this sort of mechanical marble game. It was like a big round disc with a maze on it, and you had these 2 buttons that steered this marble ball around this maze. And I'd played it to death, obviously, and I bought it in and swapped it with some rich kid's Game Boy. This was the 80s, we weren't well off, and I got to take home a Game Boy with Tetris for the summer, and I absolutely played the death out of this game. It's Tetris, it's very addictive, as I'm sure pretty much everybody knows. But yeah, I had a lot of nostalgia for the Game Boy just for that one game. So people who had Game Boys and had all the other millions of games that came out from it, I'm sure had an amazing time doing that as well. So moving on to the this area on the front, we're going to construct this with a cylinder, and then we're going to cut that in half and bridge it together to make this nice oval shape. Just going to move it out so I can see what I'm doing a bit better. So bridge the edges back together. It is guesswork here what length I make this thing, but you can fix that afterwards, obviously. I think it needs more loop cuts, so I'm going to use Nail Tools Edge Curve just to add more. It just keeps the curvature. So I'm going to get that there, rotate it into place. I was really hoping it'd be exactly 30 degrees on the rotation, but I think it's slightly less. So I'm going to fix that now. And then just add an array modifier. Oh, just as another note, the grooves we did on the back, in in case you didn't notice, there's exactly 13 of them, which struck me as odd because I think people in general are quite superstitious and they don't like to put 13s in things. So yeah, they've got 13 on that though. There's a slight error here because of that front bevel. This now no longer matches up. So just a bit of artistic license, I'm going to move it up so it sits within the bevel. It does kind of mess with the accuracy, but I don't think it matters too much. I think that corner part that I cut away as well, the angle of it's not quite steep enough. As accurate as it was to the reference, I think it should have just been exaggerated a bit more. I'm just going to speed through now and just sort of go a bit quicker. So these are obviously the buttons on the front. I'm going to Boolean in these shapes. Add some extra edges there. Again with the nail tools edge curve. It's really easy to just add sides to your cylinders while keeping them smoothed out. And equally, if you wanted to remove them, you can check a deselect after using ring. Make them exactly the same. Shade auto smooth and Boolean them, and then move them into place. It doesn't really matter how deep here, but enough to catch the bevels. Okay, then we're going to select the inner parts, duplicate and separate, and then extrude them out and turn them into the buttons. I'm just going to do a small bevel, maybe 3 segments on those. They are slightly rounded on the top of the buttons from what I've seen. And then I'm just going to scale them on their individual origins, excluding the y-axis, just so they sit slightly smaller within those holes. It just helps the bevel shader catch and look a bit more like it is a button within a case. Just moved the edges around there to fix up the auto smooth as well. Going to do the same thing again for these, pretty much as I did for the volume vents, or whatever you call them, in the bottom right. So start with the cylinder, cut it in half, join it back together by bridging the edges. Once I select the right part, that is. That's it. That's it. Bridge those. Just make it into a box. It makes it a lot easier to adjust once you've got it in place. Then you can, if you don't apply the scale here, you can obviously adjust it on that axis. So you press grab, and then if you press X twice, it will do it on the local X. So get that one into place, apply everything, and then just going to select everything and then just duplicate it across for the other button. Again, shade auto smooth, difference Boolean, and move it into place. Just because I'm ridiculously OCD, I'm going to make sure these back parts snap to the same depth as the other hole. Completely unnecessary, but it's just something I do all the time. And again, just duplicate and separate those back faces to turn them into the buttons. And then bevel the front. Yeah, really like the way those highlights are catching on the edges of those. And again, just going to shrink them down a little bit within their respective holes. These individual origins. Just trying something here, but it's not working, so I'm just gonna undo that. just going to increase the auto smooth just slightly there. It's just ever so slightly messing up on the edge. Not the end of the world. Just turn all the pivots back to the right thing. And we're going to make the D-pad. So scale that into place. This is exactly the same procedure for everything we've done so far. We just pretty much add in boxes and cylinders and then using bevels to cut them out. Extrude these along their normals, get the cross. Change all my settings back because OCD, as I've said before. And then we're just going to bevel these to give that rounding part on there. Don't need too many segments for this. I do try and keep the segment numbers even. Little trick I picked up from Josh Gambrell of Blender Bros, because obviously if you come to do the low poly and you remove every other edge, it works properly if you've got an even number of segments to begin with. I haven't played around with how that works with like if you're turning the end of a rectangle into a complete oval and you merge the middle ones. I'm assuming you need an odd number because the middle ones will merge. Haven't tested it, but I would assume so. And again, just duplicate that to make the button. With the Bevel Shader method, you generally want everything that's a separate object on the real life version of the thing to be a separate object on the 3D version as well, because you might want different size bevels. Next, I'm just going to make something behind these buttons. If you look at some reference, there's like an indent that they sit in. It's a very, very subtle. So I'm just going to make something and then try and round it out in place. It kind of goes round both buttons. Just going to try and eyeball this into place. It may not work. It's slightly fiddly doing it this way. Might make that a bit longer. That's kind of working. Make it a bit bigger. Right, so I'm just going to bring that away, and we're just going to bevel a very shallow edge on here. Definitely need more segments than that. Because the deepest part of it is pretty much flat, although it's kind of an oval cut. It's kind of flat where it goes in. So we just want it very slightly inside. That'll do for now. I may have to come back to that. I think that'll do for the moment. Just going to join these verts up just so the shading's not bugging me while I'm working. Yeah, that looks alright. With the D-pad, it does kind of recess in towards the middle, so I'm just going to fix up the topology of where we beveled the edges, I could do this with mirror modifier, but it doesn't take too long. 3 segments on each of these. We need one down the middle. Just going to use proportional editing to pull that middle part in. Might need some extra geometry here. Just going to join up these other loop cuts from the bevel. I think they might be making it problematic to try and use the proportional editing. That should hopefully work a bit better. Don't want it to cause any weird shading issues in the middle. Yeah, that seems to have worked. Just snapping the cursor to that middle vert, and I'm just going to add a quad sphere. Unsubdivide it. And just cut that into that cross. Turn off proportional editing. Just have that so it sits inside that middle part there. That looks pretty good. So it's coming along pretty well. Again, there's a sort of recessed oval around each of these buttons, so I'm just going to cheat and use a duplicate of each button, scale it up, recalculate the normals outside, and then use that as the cutter. That actually seems to work pretty well. Just seeing if I can make them wider on that axis. I'm not sure if that's going to work. Not that axis. That one. That works. Change everything back to default and just make them a little bit shallower. These recessed areas around the buttons are very shallow, like they're barely noticeable at all. But they are an extra thing that will catch the light, so that when you use the bevel shader, it just adds a lot of detail there, where otherwise it's quite a plain design otherwise. Which I think is kind of the beauty of the Game Boy. It is a very simplistic design, but there are a lot of details to it. Once you look at you'll see once we get to the final thing just how much detail is involved in it. Using another quad sphere here, there is a recessed area around the D-pad. But again, it's very shallow, so I'm going to have to keep pulling the thing away and then moving it in slightly, and just kind of working it until it fits. That's getting close. It's not massively deep though. It doesn't reveal a lot of the D-pad, so if I scale it on the y-axis, it will make that sphere a lot shallower. It is a very shallow indent. That's pretty much, that's right there. Just going to apply that. And then if we mark that as sharp, that fixes up all the shading on that area. Perfect. It's coming along quite nicely now. I'm just going to add in another reference I've got of the, this is just a quick image I found online. I'm just going to use this for the screw placement on the back of the model. just so I can get it exact. Just having a slight issue with the dimensions of it. Oh, it works in front view. Okay, so, but it's the wrong way around. So if I flip it on the X, and then if I scale it on the Y-axis to -1, it should face the right way. That's a lot better. Yeah, because I need to be able to see that side of it while it's in X-ray mode. So yeah, just going to add in a cylinder now. Go with 16 verts. Rotate it on the X-axis, and then scale it into place. Just need to do 2, and then we can mirror it across and get rid of that reference now. We don't need that. And join them together and apply the scale. And then mirror them across and apply the mirror. And we can just Boolean them straight into the body. They do go quite deep, these screw holes. I think these are the main things that hold the front half of the case to the back half. Caused some shading issues there that I may fix those up later. They're not normally too noticeable, but it does depend on where they intersect with the existing geometry. So I'll come back to those. Next I want to add these panel lines that go through the model. So I'm going to add one with the knife tool, just a cut all the way through the middle. Got plenty of space to make it wider. Might be an idea to do the front part as well though while I'm doing that. So if I move that back, and then you do another knife cut, because that goes all the way through the front. And then there's one that goes over the top as well. Just trying to think of the best way to do that. What I might do, yeah, if I hide the bottom half, then I can use the top view, and then it'll only cut through to that line. So now when I reveal the rest, it hasn't cut through to that, which is great, because I don't want that. If I select all of those lines now, slightly fiddly, and then I can bevel those all to the exact same width, which is very satisfying on such a complicated model with all these bevels everywhere. Okay, I'm going to use extrude along normals and just make that go in slightly. I'm going to leave the edges of that perfectly hard at 90 degrees. That will get taken care of by the bevel shader that we use at the end. But I just wanted that groove to exist as a real thing. As well as that, it does partly mark out the lines where some of the other recessed areas are on the top and on the sides. For example, on the left side there's a contrast wheel, on the top there's the on-off switch, parts like that. So yeah, let's cut away this area on the top. This is where the on-off switch goes. If we snap it perfectly onto this edge, we'll get what I've heard called hotlining. It's obviously where the Boolean is basically in the exact same place as another line, and it will cause some issues. You can fix it up, obviously. It's just a case of figuring out where the geometry needs to join and adding in some extra geometry for the for the cutaway parts. Like you'll see here, it's got basically two faces on top of each other and an edge that when you delete, deletes all of the top faces, which is a pain in the arse. So you just need to figure out where to add a loop on either side of this so that you can join it to that bit we extruded in the panel line that goes around the whole thing. So if we add that in and fill that face, we can then fill that face on that side. Now if we delete that edge and delete that edge, should be able to fill it back in. So join that back up to there, and then the top should all be flat. And we can just fill that with a face for now. Again, the flat areas you don't really need to fix up on the high poly on this at the moment. You will for the low poly, especially if you want to unwrap it decently. And I do normally prefer to have perfect topology. I know a lot of people don't care about it, but it's just one of those things. I feel happier in my soul knowing it's done right. Just gonna another cube here is just going to be the on-off switch. So just scaling that into place and snapping the faces down. Just going to scale it in ever so slightly, just so it sits a bit nicer in there. It just helps it catch the bevels. As much as the bevel shader will work, it will help catch the highlights if it's ever so slightly smaller. Adding a quad sphere on top of this little box that's the on-off switch. There's a little round pimple, I suppose you'd call it, that sticks up. Just something for your thumb to grip so you can slide it easier. Just cut in some loops to join it. Might change that up later on, but it'll do for now. It's just so I'm just trying to quickly fill in the details in all these areas. Let's do this part on the side now. I forget exactly what this part is. I think it's an AC adapter, but I can't remember. I know there's a similar port on the bottom that's for headphones. So yeah, I think this is like if you're literally running it off the mains or charge. I'm not sure if that's how you charge the batteries. Could you recharge batteries in a Game Boy? I can't remember. So just going to bevel the side of that and move it into place. This little recessed area kind of cuts in through the bevel at a bit of a strange angle. I'm just going to move that all the way back. It's completely unnecessary that those bottom bits were beveled. Yeah, it just kind of goes like that to create that kind of flat area that then recesses into the port. We can just snap these, we can just merge these verts back to that. It's not going to make a huge difference there. Next we're going to add in another cylinder. Just scale it into place, matching the reference, and then boolean that into the body. Duplicate and separate, and then extrude that forward. And again, that's just where that port goes. I'll probably fix this up later as well. I'll just put something temporary in there just so we know there's a something there. Try and add more edge loops, but I don't think it's going to work. No, that's just a bit of a mess. Let's not do that. Let's undo all that. We'll leave that for now. Next, we want to cut out this area where the contrast button goes on the side. So scale that into place on the Z-axis. Just line it up. A lot of these areas we can snap them so they're exactly against that panel line that goes around the whole thing. Just bevel these corners. Helps if you're in edge mode, not face. And just round them to fit the reference image. Shade auto smooth. And I'm just going to snap that to the same depth as that part there. Just going to move that over slightly, just so it doesn't hot line with that bit, so we don't need to fix up all that bit like we did on the top. Although it does seem to have caused some issue there. If you find you're working too close and you're having issues with seeing it where it keeps disappearing, just go into the view tool and change the clipping. It'll only scroll so far, but you can type in any amount, so you can just keep adding zeros. Okay, that's gone. Next we need a little recessed hole for the slider to sit in. Just going to make a box, scale it into place. Next, going to add a cylinder. That's going to be the scroll wheel. Snap that into place. I've added an extra loop cut in the middle of the box that we used as the cutter there, so that when we apply it, we'll get the middle vert, so we can get this thing at exactly the right height. Just apply that, snap that into place. I think the trouble is with this wheel, it either has to sit really far inside the body or it has to be scaled so that it's not an actual spherical wheel, because otherwise that sticks out far too much. So I'm just going to cheat and scale it so it's an oblong. It's no longer a cylinder, sorry. Just going to make it slightly wider in that hole. Don't need most of this back area, so just going to bridge that across and fill in those faces. Add some extra edges there because it's not round enough. Again, that's just the Nail Tools Edge Curve Plus. It's a free add-on you can get. I can't remember where you get it from, but if you look online, I'm sure you'll find it. It's one of the more useful add-ons you can get. Next, on the back, I'm just going to check. I'm just checking some other reference online. There's this panel area here that's slightly recessed, that's got a load of sort of trademark text in it, and who owns the patent to it, and all that kind of stuff. All the legal mumbo jumbo that no one ever reads. And then above it, there's another panel that has some sort of code number in it. I'm assuming it's like a parts number or a serial number. Just trying to move that into place. Again, these are just two boxes booleaned out of the back. Don't need to bevel anything. The Bevel Shader will take care of those so that they catch highlights nicely. Next I'm going to cut away a little section on the front here for, there's a little indent here, it's about the same size as that panel line that we've extruded all the way around the model. It just contains the on-off words and then has three little recessed areas that point towards the switch. So I'm just going to bevel the corners of this. It's not completely oval, but it's more oval than rectangular, if that makes sense. Just going to move this back. I could have just moved the whole thing there, really, couldn't I? I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to steal this piece because it's already the right curvature, the right width, and the right depth. So all I need to do with that is move the edges slightly. So if I unhide that, I can just move that edge. It doesn't go all the way up to the part where the button is. It kind of sits slightly before it. So if I stop it about there, that should be fine. And with that one, I'm going to move that all the way down into where that square area is. That oblong rectangular area, whatever you want to call it. Just been looking at some reference, and these are they're to the left of the area that says on off, but they're to the right of the bit where the switch is, which means either the on off bit is too far left or the switch is too far right, one or the other. Fortunately, because they're not all connected up properly with topology, it's quite easy to just slide them across. Move the switch across as well. Just sort of eyeballing it into place. It's not very precise at this point. And then if we move that a bit to the left, does that work? No, those three lines kind of are level with the right hand side of the switch, but the left hand side of the on off part. Maybe that's too big. Oh well, it doesn't have to be exact. Anyway, next I'm going to use a solidify modifier to just push those areas out along their normals. And then when I boolean that into there, it should give a nice panel line that's the same depth as the main panel line that goes around the whole model, separating the front and back. Just do a quick merge. Just checking where verts have worked and where they've not merged and things like that. Just checking some reference offline, off screen, sorry. I'm online but off screen. So there's basically another area very similar to the one at the top. It's exactly in the middle, and it's down here, and it has phones and a little headphones symbol in it. And that's because at the bottom underneath is a little port where you can plug your headphones in, which we'll be making very shortly. Now the part that says phones itself is slightly off center, and it too has three lines that three sort of panel lines that point in the direction of the port, but they don't go all the way up to it. I'm just going to add in a cube here to work as a little center marker. because it's just useful to have something to snap to. Those are not going to work, I don't think. I'm not 100% sure this bottom bevel is exactly neat and even as it's supposed to be. I think somewhere along the lines of snap inverts here and there, it kind of went a little bit askew. Not the end of the world. It's not hugely noticeable until you're actually trying to snap things onto it. Just going to try this a different way. Let's try it with this piece. Snap that to there and then snap it on the X to the vert on the box. Does that work? Might need to just construct those lines from scratch, which is fine. It's just a bit more work. At this stage you sort of feel like you've done all the work and you should just be able to duplicate bits and snap them where you need them. But that is the magic of 3D, it doesn't always work like that. Right, I've separated that section into its own object. And I'm just going to use an array to make 3 of them. Center it and snap it to the center of that box that's working as my little midpoint marker. These do go in a little bit further that way. Now I need to adjust the origin point of these, so I'm going to snap it to those 3 and then snap it up to those, so it's level with all the furthest corner points. If I just scale that in slightly to there, just so it'll sit slightly inside there, and then same trick as before, use solidify to push it out for the difference modifier. And I can still scale it just on that direction. Just apply everything, merge verts, and just fix up problems as and when they are. You can see almost all of these have misaligned somehow, but they should all be identical. So if I fix one lot of them, I should be able to copy them over to the other areas. So if I delete all of those and all of those, I should be able to select all of the original ones that are fixed and just copy them across. Oh, it's having a little bit of a hissy fit. Might need to go back in a second and redo that. Yeah, it's all gone a bit weird there, so I'm just going to delete all that and do it again. So duplicate and snap, and Shift R to repeat, and merge, and it's done. And then there's just some extra verts here and there that just need cleaning up. Just delete those as needed. That's it, it looks much cleaner now. Perfect. Next I'm just going to add in an area, a sort of slightly recessed area for this port on the bottom. got a slightly oval. It's oval on one end and rectangular on the other. I'm just kind of eyeballing things at this point. I'm not measuring them out properly or using proper reference. I don't think it's really necessary for every bit. I've got the main forms down, and the rest of it you can kind of eyeball it into place. Just trying to work out how far inside it needs to go with this bit. And we may need to just fix up the faces on the inside of this bit because it's at a weird place. It's just a case of adding some loop cuts so that the verts line up properly, so you can have that little lip from that inset meet up with the area where we're cutting away for the headphone jack. I'll snap that to there, merge everything. Merge that edge to there, and fill in that face. And the same on the other side, fill in that face. And then we extrude out that bit. Sorry, duplicate and separate and then extrude it out. It will be a different colour and it will probably have a different bevel. These ports are usually black with a little chrome connector part in the middle. Just adding in some topology there, just so we've got somewhere to mark for a cylinder to cut out. Again, I'll probably come back to these later on and just fix them up and make them look a bit nicer, but for now you can sort of tell what that is. One thing we haven't done yet is we haven't added in screw holes, so again I'm going to duplicate and separate that part in the back, and then just make a very basic screw head. Just add a bevel, and then I'm just going to boolean out a cross to make it look like a little crosshead screwdriver, crosshead screw. Snap the 3D cursor there so we can create a box exactly on that face. Then just scale it into place, duplicate and rotate another one for the other direction. Delete them one after the other. And just merge all the verts and fix up some of this weird geometry issues that are going on here. This is 100% not the way to model a screw. This is just a basic version to just to kind of block it out, really. I do actually have a pack of screws that I modelled some time ago with the Bevel Shader method that I'll probably just end up importing in place of these abominations that I'm currently making. Yeah, it'll do. So just duplicate that one down and snap that into place. Helps if I put its origin point in the middle, and then I can apply their locations and mirror them across. Oh yeah, I want to cut out a small area where the power light goes. So just going to have that going through there. Oh, and I forgot, the screen is very thin, so I can't select the back part because there isn't a back part, it's gone all the way through. So I'm just going to use the walls of that hole to basically make a little cylinder to act as the light. Just scale that, Shift Y, just to exclude the Y axis. And it's just like a single LED light that sits in there, I think. Scale it up. Yeah, that looks alright. Just imagine that glowing in there. And yeah, a lot of the details are really coming together now. This bit looks weird. I definitely need to fix this bit up. But yeah, that's mainly it. Alright, so on to my favourite part now, which is the colour pass and adding in the bevel shader. So I've got the colour palette of the actual Game Boy model from online, and it's got all the hex codes for the colours. So I'm going to use that to make the colour scheme for this thing. So just going to split the view. So I've got the shader editor open, starting with the first material on the list. It's the screen. So just type in the hex code, just swap the colour selector from HSL over to hex. Oh, and I see I've selected the wrong part of that while I was doing that. Let's just change that back and clear that off. So yeah, that's the green for the screen. And that's with, you've probably seen me do this a million times. I'm just going to set up ambient occlusion. So you have ambient occlusion through a colour amp, through a multiplier set to 1, plugged into the base colour, and the base colour basically goes into slot 2, and then the black slider of the colour amp will affect how much ambient occlusion you get. Also want a bevel shader on this, and you just play with the values until you start noticing it work, and then you kind of dial it back from there. These are at very small values, so we're sort of talking 0.0005 and so on, and then adjust the ambient as needed. And then once you've got one of these set up, you can basically just apply it to the next part of the model. Click the little button to make it its own version. Type in the hex code for the next colour, and then just adjust the ambient and the bevel shader as needed. And if I remember rightly, it's 0005 for the main body. You'll notice if it's massively overshot on the bevel shader, then it will look like it's not doing anything at all. All these small details and text in these areas, they're all the same material as the body. So when I add them in, they'll all get that same property. This is the darker grey. Or I'm going to call it the screen surround, just so it's got a name. Type in the hex value. That's it, looking good. And again, it's just a case of tweaking values to check what looks right and what's working. You can see there it looks inflated like a balloon, so it needs to be much less than that. That looks about right. Or is it? Maybe if I take the bevel, the ambient off, I can see better on that inside edge. That's probably my best measuring point to go from. Just want a bit of ambient in there, just because it is an inside corner. Then I'm going to add that to this first button. These are the black coloured buttons. Oh, I forgot to click the little number icon up there. Add that back in. That's the D-pad value. That's the same for that. And then dial back the radius on the bevel. You can have also, obviously you can have the same colour but with different bevel values for different sized items. Most of the black items are like the small surrounds for the plugs and switches, so they're not really noticeable anyway, so a tiny bevel on those is fine. Just do the red buttons now. There's no real bevel shader needed for those because I kind of already beveled them on the model, and so the bevel shader is not really going to do anything apart from eliminate the highlight that's already there. There wasn't a colour for these buttons, but I've just made them a slightly darker one than the screen surround. Oh yeah, we also need a metal for the screws. They were imported with one. So I'm just going to take off, you can see there it's reflecting the red from the colour palette that I imported, so that will disappear when I'll get rid of that. Just going to reduce the bevel radius 1, because I think I shrunk them down. They were huge when I imported them. They're from my screws pack that I've got that I was saying about earlier. Just going to apply that metal to all the little bits inside the ports. The headphone jack and the power adapter jack. Then we want an emission material on this power light. Although the switch is in the off position, if you want to be really pedantic about it, I don't. So I just want the little light to light up because it again sparks joy. So yeah, get rid of the prince board because we only actually need an emission shader in there. The strength of 5 seems to work fine. Just going to scale this screen surround in slightly, just so it catches a bit more shadow around that area. And that's it. And then you can pass this, and you can then make the low poly if you want to, and bake all these bevel details down. Hope you've enjoyed this. I've really enjoyed making this project. If you do like it, give me a subscribe and a like and a follow, and give me a comment if you found it useful. If you learned anything, that'd be great to hear from you. Thanks for watching. Take care.